Globalization is the integration and connectiveness of countries and economies around the world. It is also the impact of economic activity in the world. There are five components of globalization, and they are trade, financial flows, investments and T&Cs, transport technology and communication, and international division of labor and migration. Other factors that come with globalization are free trade agreements, and international organizations, but we will cover this later in the video. Economies are linked together more now than they were a few decades ago, and one factor can greatly affect other economies as well. All these aspects of globalization can be illustrated by a group of kids in a school playground trading football cards, and we can see this in the picture with the arrows representing the trade between different countries. Trade is a major part of globalization and is a measure of how goods are consumed in economies around the world, and has increased dramatically in the past 2 decades. China has seen an increase in its trade balance growing from negative $7.75 billion in 1988 to $295.46 billion in 2008. And this is the case for other economies around the world because since they are all closely interlinked, if a few economies have an increase in trade, then the domino effect will also see other nations see an increase in trade. Trade and GWP are closely related. This refers to the sum of total outputs of goods of nations in the world over a certain amount of time. Due to the increase in trade, GWP is now 10 times bigger than it was in 1950s, growing from 4,081 to 42,028 billion dollars. For example, our different groups of school kids are now all trading different cards between each other. The Chinese group has Team 1 cards and they want Team 2 cards, and the Australian group has Team 2 cards but they want Team 1 cards. So both groups trade to obtain the cards they demand, but some cards are cheaper to obtain due to the level of demand there is for that card. So we have groups trading cards based on the level of demand there is for those cards. And all groups are trying to buy cards from their shops, and some groups can buy cards at a cheaper price than others. This is called comparative advantage. To be more efficient and gain more cards, both groups should focus on buying whatever is cheapest and trade those cards to end up with the most cards as possible. Financial flows is the movement of money between countries and economies. Financial flows is very close to trade and investments because they are all involved in the movement of money. But it is important not to mix financial flows and investments together. Financial flows involves the movement of money between nations with the expectation of a return of good or service. An example of this in the school playground would be the Australian group paying money for a card from the Chinese group. The transaction of money from the Australian group to the Chinese group will be financial flows. The current stats of financial flows for China are negative $816. This is a decrease from $162. This is the lowest it has been since 1998, but the highest it was $1,320, but the forecast is to decrease even more. There are more than 2 ways financial flows work. One way is the movement of purchasing goods just explained, and the other way is the investment of money. This is when people buy different currency in the expectation of making a profit. For example, people will buy Chinese currency when it's at low value and wait until its value has increased and then sell it. With it, make some money. In the playground, it will be like when the Australian group trades one card from the Chinese group for a card of a team that isn't performing well. They wait until the team wins the premiership and then they trade that card back to the Chinese group for 3 cards. So in the end, the Australian group made a profit of 2 cards, and then they can trade those cards for even more cards and end up with even more cards. Investments are another major role in globalization. Investments are the movement of money with the expectation of return of money. This money can be in the form of dividends, yield, interest, or rent. There are 2 different types of investments, FDIs and portfolio investments. They are similar, but they have some differences. FDIs can be used to measure investment growth. They are the movement of money between nations that are directly invested in economic activity or the purchase of companies, mainly made by developed nations into developing nations where there is potential for profit with cheap mass labor. FDIs are also the investment of shares where you can control the interests of shares and where you can also make some business decisions. With portfolio investments, you are still investing in shares of a company overseas, but you can't control the interest or the business decisions. This year, foreign investments in China reached $48.91 billion, with an increase of 2.8% from last year. In the playground, it could be seen as the Australian group trading cards with the Chinese group in hope they would trade them wisely and come back with some interest for the Australian group. With FDIs, the Australian group would trade cards with the Chinese group, but they get a say in how they trade the cards. Technology, transport, and communication have played a key role in the development of globalization within the past few decades. The increase of technology has allowed the ability to transport more goods at any given time. Also, advanced technology has increased the speed of time it takes to trade goods, and has encouraged more people to trade and thus increased globalization. Communication has made trade easier and thus more trade has been conducted. This can be seen in the playground when students who have access to phones and email, the more advanced economies, can communicate to each other outside school hours and make more trades before the other groups can even get a chance to, the less developed nations. So the Australian group can trade with the American group because they both have access to a phone, and the Chinese group, who doesn't have access to a phone, will have to wait until the next day to trade, and thus they get a poorer trade because the better trade option has been already taken by the American group. Also, the developed groups can still trade in the holidays because of the advanced transport system of the mail. Because of this, the American and Australian groups have better trade and are more developed economies because of their advanced communication and transport technology, leaving China to develop a lot slower. International Division of Labour and Migration allows people from nations to travel to other nations and help develop the second nation. This is done by people migrating and training a group of people to do more skilled jobs, or migrating a whole group of people to do the skilled jobs for them. This market is a lot slower moving market than other components of globalization, because people don't change and move countries within a matter of days. It's a slow-paced transfer. According to the International Organization of Migration, in China, 0.1% of the population are migrants. This can be seen in the playground by kids moving from the Australian group to the Chinese group and helping the Chinese group in trading cards, so they can become more developed and increase their skills in trading cards. Free trade is a situation where governments impose no barriers to trade that restricts the free exchange of goods and services between countries. This allows more trade to happen between countries and thus increase and maintain globalization. Free trade allows countries to obtain products they cannot produce because of their comparative advantage, as mentioned before. It also improves the efficiency of resource allocation. With free trade, consumers can obtain a greater variety of goods and services. Since free trade allows more products to be traded, it increases employment rates to make products and also increase economic growth. In the playground, this can be seen as the kids trading with no rules, and this allows more kids in the groups to trade. So more kids in the Chinese group are buying and trading cards to the Australian group and also other groups in the playground. But free trade could also bring structural unemployment in the short term, increase domestic economic instability, thus making economies dependent on the global market. International markets are not a level playing field, as developed economies have a clear advantage, and developing economies, like China, may find it difficult to participate in a competitive market. So we could see the American, European, and Australian groups trading fine with each other, but the Chinese group are struggling to participate in the free trade. Free trade agreements are formal agreements between countries with the aim of breaking down barriers to trade with those nations. There are three types of trade agreements: global, multilateral, and bilateral. Trading blocks are when a number of different nations enter a multilateral free trade agreement and exclude other economies. Examples of these are APEC, the EU, NAFTA, AFTA, etc. These multilateral trade agreements has made China's share in the world's imports increase from 3.3% in 2001 to 5.9% in 2004, and its exports from 3.9% in 2001 to 6.5% in 2004. From these stats, we can see that multilateral and bilateral agreements has helped China become a participant in world trade. An example of this is all the groups form together to make a multilateral agreement to trade their cards between each other whilst excluding the American group. Or the Chinese and Australian groups form a bilateral agreement to become better at trading cards with each other. Finally, there are organizations that help global trade. Some of these organizations are the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. The WTO is an organization that implements and advances trade agreements and resolving arguments that might rise. In the playground, the WTO could be represented as a teacher who solves arguments, or a group of older students whose job is to fix disputes. The IMF are in ensuring financial stability. They keep exchange rates relatively stable and minimize the effect of a financial crisis. This is done through loans and rescue packages. This could be seen as a parent who increases their kids' weekly allowance so they could go and buy more and better quality cards to increase their odds and ability to trade. The World Bank gives aid to poorer countries in promoting economic development. This could be seen as a group of Year 12 students who help the less developed groups by teaching them how to better trade and obtain their cards, and also when to and when not to trade certain cards.